Good too, I'm going to assume. Looks like we have an up market this morning, which makes me very, very happy. That is a very nice way to start our day and to view how traps got short when it looked absolutely horrendous yesterday and see how they flipped the script on them, right? And now they are in a pretty sideways shape this morning. So I may actually have to adjust the chart a little bit here right before the open. I'll look at it in about 15 minutes and make some adjustments. No, it's just up. I mean, we're up. Futures are up 11 points from the close yesterday, so we don't necessarily have we won't know if we have an open drive there until we get going. So let me kind of jump into the scenarios here real quick, so that we can have a good idea of what possibly to expect. So clearly we are going to have a significant gap. So let's kind of pull this out on the ES scenario first. Okay, so looks like we're opening up at 82.75, and my guess is by the open we'll push up into this 85 range. All right, so we're gonna have two key points. That's too thick. We're gonna have two key points here. The first thing, this is gap fill right here. It's 71.5. That is a big, 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 big gap, right? So the first thing that we're going to be looking for in terms of strength is half gap. If we open 85, we close 71, let's say that's 14 points. So 7 points off of 85, assuming we get there, right, will bring us right to 78. If we don't get half gap, it'll bring us right to this point right here. Excuse me, if we don't get to 85, if we open right here at 83, it'll actually put the top of this zone right here. So either this location, right, depending on trade size, or this location will be the first place I will attempt to get along. Now, there's two scenarios with a big gap up, right? We're either squeezing everyone that shorted off the lows yesterday, right? And then we're going to have a panic open where they cover out of the gate, and then we get sell pressure. And so what that would look like if that's the case. So let's hypothetically open at 85.50 so we can at least have a zone to operate off of, right? What I want to watch out for, be cautious of, is what appears to be a gap and go, but what actually is a gap into exhaustion. And then we get responsive sellers that drive us down into yesterday's high. That's going to be the first test, right? Now, clearly, if we hold above yesterday's high, test down, and then rotate back up and clear whatever the opening print is, right? The first move we're going to have up is into initial resistance. I expect responsive sellers at initial resistance, and I'm actually hoping we get the 79 test so I have a large enough rotation into initial resistance to take this trade without having to have additional evidence like tick divergence. Not sure if we'll have it. It could be that we open 85, and then this is only going to be a 3 or 4 point drive, and that would make this location, just because of the lack of intraday, meaning regular trading hour session rotation, it would make it difficult for me to take by itself, and I'd really have to play it off the cuff. I don't like doing it that way if I can avoid it. So first scenario is we come down, we hold yesterday's high, and then we drive up into initial resistance. I'll take a short at initial resistance. It's an area I'm willing to take a loss at, as long as I can get at least a 6 point rotation moving into whichever point in the zone that I take it. Now, just because there's some new people in here I noticed this morning, to be clear, my objective is, I have several objectives. The first one is, my first objective is to always protect my capital, right? No one trade matters, no one day matters, no one week matters. So what I'm looking for is to get a good extension out of the gate, a good extension before I enter a trade. I'm looking to trade only within the zones, and for the purpose of clients I'm not coaching, the primary focus is always on the first touch of the zone. Everything else requires a little bit more work to figure out whether or not it'll be valid, and I almost never take a third trade of the zone, okay? So I'm not looking to trade a lot. The objective is to simply increase trade size as I stack up successful trades. So that's scenario A, right? Obviously, if we clear initial resistance, we have to look for a possible trend scenario, in which case 1801, 1799 area becomes our next real big hurdle right up here. And I will certainly, almost no matter what happens this morning, I will take a trade to the short side at this point. I'm willing to take a loss here as well. Let's go over scenario 2. I've already covered the scenario where we open, right? We open into exhaustion, and then we come down. On that exhaustion, if we move down and then we clear below the overnight high, that would essentially be a trap trade that I've laid out for many of y'all, right? Where we've broken, then we get trapped below where the volume is. But really, because of the spikes yesterday, and I'll show you this really quickly, because of the spikes, the true trap trade would actually be getting below 1775, 1773. And so I would not be overly aggressive trapping here. Instead, what I would look for if this occurred, if we get, so let's go through that scenario again, right? Now that we know where everything is, we open into this area here, we come down, and I would expect to find responsive buyers actually here the first time with a good rotation. Then it becomes key. Once we come back up for this test, if we can clear back above, we can actually rotate into initial resistance. And if we can somehow clear initial resistance, then we have an open gate to 1800. I don't actually expect to hit this till sometime tomorrow if we hit it at all. And like I said, under either of these scenarios, right, where we come into yesterday's high and rotate up into initial resistance, or we come down here and rotate, no matter what, I will take, short of consolidating right in front of the zone, I will take a trade at initial resistance to the short side. Coming down here, if we are unable to clear yesterday's high and get trapped back below what is now pre-market support, was pre-market resistance, right? Then I would look for a test down into the white zone, and I would be a responsive buyer there. Again, this all assumes that I can get at least a 6-point rotation. For more conservative traders, remember, our ranges have expanded. I'm not going with the 10-point rotation today simply because we have no news that's going to drive this market up or down in a whipsaw kind of fashion. So I'm comfortable going back to 6. If you're conservative or you want to hedge that a little bit, push it to 7 or 8. But I'll be trading off of 6. I'm very comfortable at that rate, locating my trades on that size rotation. But whatever you choose, make sure you decide before the market opens, right? Because you don't want to leave an indecision point that will cause inconsistency in your thinking, and because that leads to fear and erratic trading. We don't want that at all. Going on with the scenario to the downside, right? If we come in, again, if we fail here, or we simply just have an open drive lower, right? 3 bars, and the first bar tends to be the high. It'll be tricky because the tick is clearly going to be positive when we open, right? And so what you'll see in the tick, if you look at the tick on if you pull up a 5-minute bar, will be a constant move lower of the highs. It'll look like this. That'll be a clue that we're actually entering a bizarre trend day down, where we gap up and then trade into a trend day down, which is certainly possible, right? Don't get overly eager up here thinking that we're going to rotate higher. This could simply be the result. We spent a lot of time down at that 1755 area, down here, 1765 area yesterday. We spent a good, I'd say, 30 to 40 minutes. That developed a lot of sells in this area and very late or aggressive shorts. And those guys are squirming right now to cover. And that's why we're getting this push up. So we could quite easily have it so that that gap is the high of the day. And I'll look for what would look like normally a gap down and open drive lower to push us lower. In this case, I will be cautious, right? I'll be cautious looking for longs until we get a good stretch, either down into the white zone, right? Or let me correct what I said. If we get this open drive lower, I'll be cautious and I'll move my first long back to the white zone, is what I meant to say. Okay, to be clear, I will look for tick divergence at this zone to take a trade, and I'll need at least a 6-point rotation, but I'll be quick. If I see this on my longs, I will be very quick to exit those, meaning I will take mostly 2-point trades and leave very, very small trailers, if any at all, right? That would be concerning if we got an open drive down after this gap. Okay, so that being said, once we're underneath here, if we're unable to regain over the high again, we could easily come back down and test yesterday's lows again. I would be concerned that if we tested it again, that we could get a break to the downside down into initial support. Okay, so at each of the zones, I expect rotation with as long as we get good extension and no consolidation right above the zone. So that's really the downside scenario that had to play out. Let's go through the upside scenario first with the trend day idea, right? We open up at the high, which would be 85, and then we open drive higher straight into initial resistance, right? This would not be enough of a rotation for me to really take it automatically. I'd have to see something else there. It certainly could work, but I'm not. It's just too small a rotation for me to take aggressively. If we open drive higher, the first thing I'm going to look for is going to be a zero tick reading, which I've pointed out before. Zero tick readings are hard to get because what you end up getting is a pattern like this, where you get 3 bars up and then you get a small consolidation, right? The New York NYSE tick will come to 0 and we'll still be sitting at or near the high of the day. The tip off of this trade working is that as NYSE tick comes in, there is no give on the S&P futures. And what that simply means is on the broader index, they're selling, right? But the cash flow into the S&P 500, the strongest stocks, particularly in the S&P 500, are getting positive cash flow. So as soon as the general overall market selling has terminated, which generally gets to when we get to 0, right? And if these stocks haven't given up any, guess what happens when the cash comes back in on the buy side? We get a push up, and that's usually your best entry on a trend day up scenario. Now, if we get these 3 bars up to the upside, the first thing I'm going to be looking for outside of that 0 tick for an entry is time frame, right? If it's I seriously doubt we get a trend day up all day long. Could happen, but I doubt it. So the first thing I'll be looking for is time of day, right? If I'm going to leave trailers. I really don't want to leave trailers prior to 9:30 a.m. The time of reversal, again, if we'll look yesterday, we had the same situation, right? Between 10:30 and 11:30, we tend to get reversal times, and actually close and more frequently between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m. So this will be the time that I'm focusing on looking on a bigger picture reversal and or at least a flattening out of the trend, right? And then what we'd have to figure out is if this is going to be a trend day up, which would look like this, or we can have simply range extension and then trade sideways like this, or we can have failed range extension, right? We open up to a trend day, we hold strong 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then as we progress through mid-morning, we start to get weakness and we come back in. And this scenario could very, very easily happen, right? Where we're simply, again, just getting a short squeeze out of the gate. People got too eager to short on the downside. Now they're getting squeezed on the upside. So that's the possible open drive scenario in both directions. The other scenario that happens, right, is we come up here and we open in the 85 area. We simply rotate down, and then we balance between initial resistance, right, and the white zone. We just simply have a larger day of balance right in here. It would make sense. We've had a lot of moves up and down, right? And if you look between this white zone, this is 1770, this is 1790. This is a really wide zone. This is 20 points, right? So our average day prior to getting this news, right, was usually 12 to 15 points. So if we go back to the old range, again, assuming that we're going to slow down and not keep ripping in both directions, right? We gap, we possibly push up into initial resistance, right? Then we come back down, and then we either trade like this, some variation on this right here. Now, how will we know that this scenario is going to be what we're getting for today where we're just consolidating? The way that we would know that is if we look at the tick, and the tick after 9 a.m. is staying predominantly between positive 500 and negative 500, that would be my tip-off that we are in a balanced scenario, right? The other thing that would be indicative of that is that the spikes above, meaning 6 to 800 tick positive, 6 to 800 tick negative, right, are marking highs and lows, right? If you catch that action early in the day, it'll be another tip-off. If that's the case, right, our best trades will be from the outside, right, back into the middle, right, all day long. And so I'm actually going to give this scenario, this is actually my first choice for scenario as opposed to trend day up, trend day down, be a gap, probably a little bit of a push, possibly up into initial resistance. In this case, hopefully we don't open drive. We get the scenario where we test overnight high, then come back up to initial resistance, maybe even with a little tick divergence in addition to the first move up. I will definitely try to stick over half my position for a larger move back down and hopefully down into this zone, and we end up with something of this variation. the last scenario that I'm looking for, right, is a trap trade. If we, and the trap trade can work two ways today. So if we get above, we drive very strong, and then we close below um, pre-market resistance to 1780, and we're unable to get back above. That could open the door for a move back into overnight lows, right, and push to the other end of the range. I'll call that out if I see it possibly setting up. Again, this trade's hard to take from the point that you have a trade, that you initiate a trade here, because obviously your stop is your squeeze all the way up to whatever the day's high is. Conversely, right, if you have a trailer and we do get up and we do get underneath this 1780 level, it would be worth possibly leaving the last part of that for a potential trip down to overnight lows, and if we get really extended, a break of those lows. But I don't see that happening. So that's my scenario there. The other thing that I'm noticing that's changing here, and this was the case again yesterday afternoon, NQ became very strong yesterday and actually led us up, and it's leading us up this morning. We're above 3,500, and that 3,500 is key. I'll be watching to see if we can sustain above 3,500, followed by 3,510. If we can, NQ will be asserting leadership, and the upside drives through this entire rally have been led via NQ. Okay, so those are the two things that I'm looking at. Again, we're opening right up into this 1784, 1785, and I'm really hoping that we can get a test lower for an entry to the long side and have that test come not off an open drive. In other words, we consolidate up here a little bit, then push lower, and then get our push up so I can get a nice entry into the short side up here. Let's look at NQ. I pulled the basics of that chart around really quickly. It's not completed. I'll finish it off here shortly. But there's two key areas here. So 3501, which we're actually trading above right now, is an open gap there. That is right here. And then we obviously have the gap fill from yesterday. Those are two key areas. This is yesterday's high, and we're currently trading at 3505.75. I would really like to see us. Okay, so let's go through the scenario of what would give us indication of NQ is strong or not. So obviously, on the backside test of this open gap, if we're truly strong, we'll simply come down, test, and take off from that point. Again, it'll be hard for me to take a long there due to lack of rotation. If we're strong and we get a lack of and we do not get below here, I will be hesitant to take a short here for concern of trap trades, and instead we'll locate or look for potential first short up in this zone right here. This 3530 to 3540 would actually be my preference for a trade to the short side, and I would probably actually be looking to buy puts both in ES and NQ up in this range, as well as trying to get positioned overall. And again, I will be cautious on shorting this if we open drive higher there. So holding above here is the first test. Next test is, can we hold above yesterday's highs? And then that's followed by gap fill and half gap. If you want to look at this, right, if we open at 3505 and 3473, so that's essentially 30 points. So 15-point rotation lower from 3505 would bring us to 3490, which is the backside of this zone. That would be half gap. I want at least a 10-point rotation in NQ before I take a trade, right? And preferably, given the ranges we've had the last couple of days, 30 points, 30 to 60 is really ideal, right? For in terms of leaving trailers. 15 obviously, 10 to 15 obviously works for smaller scalps in terms of trade rotation size. So I want to see three things here. I want to see NQ hold above the gap, hold above this open gap on the test, and I want to see it hold half gap. But remember, we can still open up all the way up here, come all the way down, and do gap fill, right? And still be setting a higher low and come back up and trade. The question will be is, wherever this responsive buying comes back in, will be how does it handle from this point once we've closed this point and this point, right? How do we handle yesterday's high? If we get up above yesterday's high, we could squeeze at the end of the day, certainly. And 3530 to 3540 is certainly a possibility today, and it wouldn't be a big stretch from here. That's only 30 points from where we're opening. Again, I think we need to do a little back and filling first before we get that shot, considering how strong the open is. But Facebook had good numbers. The assumption will be that Google will have good numbers, and that's what's driving NQ this morning, and that'll probably drag ES by its heels. So that's my scenario there. What would kill this scenario of looking for an upside move, right, is if we come in to gap fill and we fail to get any responsive buyers, a gap fill back up, right? If that scenario occurs, I'd be very cautious at a retest here, and instead would be interested in playing down here. But I think this is unlikely today, right? Maybe tomorrow, but not today. And again, I'm not going to be jumping on the long trade out of the gate. I'm going to need a rotation lower to get in and or a zero tick. And I am skeptical, actually, of a trend day up scenario. I just don't think it's in the cards. I think this is simply a short squeeze out of the gate. As a matter of fact, I have some options that I'll be selling at the market off of the open. So that's really those are my scenarios for today. I'll call them as I see them. Again, the volatility has been high. If you're concerned about getting stops, right, it throws your game, simply go to a 10-point rotation as your minimum rotation. The price for that rotation is going to be that if we come back to a normal trade, meaning there's no news to drive us one way or the other, you're not going to get very many trades in there, but you won't risk your capital will have a lot lower risk of getting stopped out on your trades. I'll be trading off of 6-point rotations today. There's no doubt on my mind, and I'll be looking for the tick divergences. That's essentially my A scenario. I'd like to go through and look real quick at the volume profiles, if that's okay with everyone. Let me make sure no one has comments here. Okay, so in trying to keep this succinct, let's squeeze this back down. Okay, so the first thing that we see on NQ, we are opening up 35.05, which puts us right in here. Okay, so here's my concern. See this right here? This is essentially the top of the old trading range. Let's get a specific number here. Okay, there's 2 points. This point right here and this point right here. This 3,500 and this to 3,520. Okay, that essentially acted, if you can see, it acted as the top of the attempted breakouts from the prior balance and the bottom, right, of the prior trading range. So really we have to get above 3,520 for anything to change. Otherwise, all this is, right, is we're coming up. We're getting extended up. Again, 3,520 would be nice, 3,530 area, right? And then we just come back over and continue this rollover to the downside. This is a highly probable scenario if we're getting breakdowns to the downside, right? This is a really nice move. This is essentially 34.50, right? 34.55 was the low yesterday. All the way, this is already a 50-point move. If we add another, if we can somehow squeeze up to this 35.50 area, that's a 100-point move on NQ. That's really pretty good, right? And as you see, it would only bring us back approximately, if 34.50 to 36.50, let's just call this halfway, is going to be right about here approximately, is half that move, right? Markets tend to trace a half to 62% and then continue with the move to the downside. So that is something to keep in mind. I'm not overly eager, again, about a continued push from this level. It is possible to push all the way to 1803 on ES. That is a possibility, but I don't think we're going to get it in one day. Maybe by tomorrow, but I don't think we'll get it in one day. So with that being said, and that keeping that in mind, so if I'm at the top and the bottom of this range, obviously I want to hold above 3,500. If I slip back below 3,500, obviously coming back down and testing here, the first real area where we have a lot of meat to work off of, okay, is this 3,400. Now, there are areas in between here, between 3,450 and 3,400, but it's all pretty poorly auctioned, okay? We pick up some decent auction action right in here. I'd say 3,420 to 3,400, but we still have room to push to the downside on NQ, right? If we push above that 3,520, 3,530, then the old highs become a possibility. I don't exactly see how we're going to get that. This is going to be the first big area if we do have true strength. up into that 3,600 level. Looking at, so I hope I want to make myself clear, right? I expect to push up. I would expect to find rejection in here. And my suspicion is that we're going to come back and do some backing and filling, at least to this gap fill. And then we'll either come back up or we'll push down from there. That's a long way off. Prognostication is kind of useless at this point, going that far in. And then looking at, yes. Okay. Looks like we are opening up at 1785. That puts us $17.85, puts us right there, right? Clearly, on the daily, we have a open, and I've marked this off. We have a an open gap, right, sitting right there. And I imagine once we come into this 1788 area, we will find responsive buyers there. Again, I'm just hoping that we get a good rotation into that level, but I expect responsive sellers in that area the first time in. Above that, the first area where we're going to have any kind of help is going to be that 1800 to 1798 area, and I would expect responsive sellers there. So hoping for a push down actually before we get a push up this morning. On the downside, right, if we clear yesterday's fill, there's not a lot holding us or helping us out down here. Okay, it's simply the bottom of the range. If we break into the range just like we did here, right, if we fall into the range, the new bottom of that range becomes 1740. However, I don't see us just getting there today. Maybe tomorrow if we gap down into this area, that becomes a possibility. That's really my only scenario. We have this sitting above us, this 1820 to 1845. Everyone's familiar with it. And so we'll see. We'll see from there. Guys, if you give me 1 minute, I had one other point, but I want to make sure that I have my options orders ready to fire off here real quick once the market maker's open. Okay, so the last piece that I have this morning that I want to run over here real quick while we're opening. I'm going to drag this over. Okay, in terms of structure, just looking at these charts, right? This is NQ, this is ES. Looking at it from a little bit different perspective, this is the first area we have true structure in, right? There's a small one right here. Okay, this would be the first place if we roll to the downside on NQ that, let me switch this over. Right here at this 3490. Okay, so even if we surpass below 3500 a little bit, I'd want to see if we come in, find responsive buyers, then push back out, and then back above 3500. That would be the real key. If we get trapped underneath 3500, right, after this first responsive test, really you can't say that the downside scenario for the day is intact until we get below and hold below 3485. So this becomes an important area on NQ. On ES overnight, right, the majority of the meet in terms of support and resistance took place between 1778 1776. Totally plausible that we come in, test and ricochet off of that, and or off the bottom and ricochet back off. Conversely, right, if we fall below, backside test, and that would push us lower. So this becomes our first real key testing area on the day, and it's what I'll be watching. I'll release charts as they get updated, as I can update them through the course of the day. And really that's the what I'm looking for today. Again, give it room, give your rotations room. Don't be overly eager to trade. The market will come to you, just like everyone who was panicking at the lows yesterday. Don't let them panic at the high today. Don't join them in the panic, at least, to rush in. Instead, take advantage of that and let it pay you. So anyways, that's all I got, guys. Have a wonderful day. we shall also be updating through the course of the day. Yeah, I see that. I see that, Dan. So again, I'm not overly eager to be buying. Dan was pointing out that we have an extreme tick reading at the gate, and again, I'm not overly eager to buy that. So if anything, I'd like to fade it. I'd really like to fade this 3510 here on NQ, but not enough rotation. So anyways, have a great day, guys. We'll talk to you later.